She ruled a dying empire with a voice that could still make fleets pause, but even that power could not stop the treaty. The council's verdict was final: marry the human or watch the outer colonies burn. Queen Aravali of the Valari dynasty didn't blink as her advisors listed the political benefits, the military reinforcements, the so-called honor. Her fingers were steady, her expression unmoved, but inside her mind thrashed. Not because of the union itself, but because of what she was marrying. The humans were ghosts wrapped in iron. Efficient, cold, impossible to predict. Stories came from across the stars. Entire armadas silenced, insurgents vanishing mid-transmission, planets that once resisted simply bowing after a single visit. No one knew what Earth truly looked like. No alien ever returned from its soil. Their diplomats were polite. Their soldiers never spoke out of turn. Their silence was a weapon sharper than plasma. The human general chosen for her was known only as Kale Voss. No public records, no visual archives, only a single line from the Galactic War Codex. Operated under sole command. Result: 17 planetary victories. 0 losses. No one bragged about him. That was the most unsettling part. He wasn't a hero. He was a function. The Queen stood alone in her observatory, the city below flickering in the fading light of 3 moons. Her empire spanned sectors, yes, but most of it now existed only in memory. The crystalline revolt had shattered the outer provinces. Pirate kings had declared their own sovereignty. Refugees clogged her gates. And now, on top of it all, her own people whispered about surrender. This marriage was supposed to be a solution. But to her, it felt like capitulation in ceremonial robes. When the human envoy ship finally arrived, it didn't descend with honor guards or theatrics. It docked without a word, ignoring the expectations of her ceremonial fleet. No emblems, no music, just purpose. She awaited him in the royal hall, flanked by nobles adorned in violet and gold, each one hiding fear beneath silks. Then the doors opened and he walked in. He wasn't a monster. That, somehow, made it worse. He was tall, yes, and armored in a sheen of adaptive metal that whispered instead of clanked. His steps were precise, but not threatening. His eyes scanned the room, not searching for danger, but cataloging it. She had seen predators before. This was something else entirely. Predators had hunger. Kale Voss had calculation. He bowed the exact required angle. No more, no less. She responded in kind. No smiles. No falsities. Just protocol. You are as punctual as your kind is said to be, she said. I dislike inefficiency, he replied. His voice wasn't cold. It wasn't even aggressive. It was level. Controlled. She studied it for cracks and found none. The ceremony was scheduled in 3 days. In that time, they were to attend diplomatic councils, exchange oaths, and perform unity rituals. She had expected resistance from him, perhaps reluctance to conform to her people's ways. But he did everything required, perfectly. No complaint, no deviation. Not obedience. Compliance. Like a strategist moving through a known battlefield. She confronted him the night before the first council session. You follow every order, she said, watching him from her private chamber steps. Is that how your kind conquers? Through silence and precision. Kale looked at her. We conquer when we must. We protect when others can't. Sometimes the methods look the same. You believe this marriage will protect us? I believe your empire is collapsing, he answered. And when it does, the scavengers will not care about bloodlines. She stepped closer. And you do. I care about strategy. You are still a linchpin. Remove you and your empire burns faster. Keep you standing, and there's still something to salvage. She wasn't sure if it was an insult or a compliment. She wasn't sure he cared. But the next day, during the unity ritual, when an ambassador from the Quran Syndicate tried to interrupt with objections, it was Kale who spoke first. Not loudly. Just enough to cut through the chamber. The Queen has agreed to this alliance. Any voice raised against her is a voice raised against mine. The ambassador sat down before guards could even respond. That evening, she received classified intel from one of her spymasters. It contained fragments, clipped signals and decrypted logs, about Kale's past. His first mission ended a slave rebellion on 3 moons without deploying a single strike craft. He once evacuated a colony midquake by rerouting its atmospheric flow using only local tech and 30 soldiers. He volunteered for a Black Ops siege mission where 12 operatives went in. He came out alone. Mission succeeded. There were no medals. Just reports. Uncolored. Undramatic. Like someone documenting gravity. Aravali felt something she hadn't in years. Not fear. Not anger. Curiosity. If he was truly ruthless, he would have taken over already. But he hadn't. He followed her lead, even when it was inefficient. He never questioned her in public. He never tried to impress anyone. He watched. He adapted. She summoned him again. "Why didn't you object to this marriage?" she asked. He answered without hesitation. "Because the machine threat your empire ignores is real." She narrowed her eyes. He continued. "We intercepted data streams from the ancient zones beyond the fracture belt. Something has awakened there. Something that doesn't care about borders or treaties. Why tell me now? Because you're the last leader in this quadrant still holding the line. I don't need your love. I need your empire to survive long enough to stand with us." The weight of his words pressed heavier than any crown. She dismissed him with a nod, then spent the next hours poring over the data he brought. It wasn't propaganda. It was hard-coded terror, entire colonies going dark. AI signatures looping into madness. Energy spikes that made no astrophysical sense. And still, her council debated wedding colors. She grew quieter after that. Not colder, sharper. Kale began briefing her directly in the mornings. His style wasn't demanding. He didn't offer suggestions. He laid out facts and let her lead. It was the most respect anyone had shown her in months. When the wedding day arrived, there was no joy. Only calculation. Nobles wore their finest while security scanned every breath in the room. Kale wore ceremonial human armor, sleek, dark, and without decoration. She wore a gown embroidered with star maps of their combined territories. The vows were exchanged before the elder flame. Traditional, rigid. But when Kale said his part, he didn't read. He spoke. "I vow not to own nor to bind. Only to stand. In fire. In silence. In all wars." She had prepared herself for the worst: submission, dominance, politics. But those words weren't a threat. They were a strategy. The night ended without celebration. The Empire didn't cheer. But they didn't revolt either. That was a start. In the silence of her private chamber, she stared into the stars. Kale entered without announcing himself. "You don't knock. I heard your guards 6 steps away. You knew I was coming." She turned. "And if I had said no? Then I'd have left." He didn't approach. Didn't presume closeness. Just stood at a respectful distance, hands behind his back. She studied him again. Not his armor, not his rank. Just him. "I feared you would be a monster. I feared you'd be a fool," he replied. "Neither of us were right. The marriage did not heal the Empire, but it bought it time. Time enough for enemies to second-guess, for factions to pause, for fear to shift. It wasn't love that held the new union together. It was necessity forged by silence." Kale Voss did not try to charm anyone. He did not attend the celebratory feasts arranged by nobles desperate to find advantage. He spent his first night after the wedding reviewing planetary defense logs and reorganizing orbital patrols without asking permission. He acted as if command was not something given but something earned by simply stepping forward. The Queen did not stop him. Her advisors begged for restraint. They called his actions invasive, a diplomatic misstep, even a challenge to her sovereignty. But they couldn't refute the numbers. Kale's adjustments cut pirate incursions in half within a week. Reallocation of energy grids saved 3 border colonies from blackout. He didn't seek credit. He didn't speak in court. He simply delivered results faster than her best generals ever had. That alone shifted the court's mood. Some saw him as a protector. Others saw a conqueror in disguise. Aravali didn't offer either label. She simply watched him work. It wasn't until the assassination attempt that the lines truly shifted. A diplomatic reception brought in delegates from the surviving mid-core sectors. Wine flowed, speeches echoed. The Queen moved through the chamber in statecraft autopilot. Then her throat tightened, not from emotion, but gas. Odorless. Deliberate. She felt the air shift a breath too late. Her vision blurred. Kale was already moving. His hand grabbed her shoulder, spun her behind him, and his other hand fired a microburst pulse across the room. No hesitation. No question. 3 cloaked figures dropped from the ceiling, blades halfway drawn. The 4th never made it into the chamber. Kale had already sent a secondary drone to intercept at the entrance. By the time the guards reacted, it was over. He didn't scold. He didn't demand reward. He simply placed a breathing mask over her face, checked her vitals, and walked her to a secured medbay without uttering a word. Later, she asked why he had detected the threat first. He responded, "I don't delegate survival." The attackers were traced back to a splinter faction of her own empire, royal cousins who saw the human marriage as treason. She sentenced them without delay. But even after justice, the whispers grew louder. That it had taken a human to save the Queen in her own palace. She didn't deny it. Curiosity sharpened into interest. Aravali ordered an internal review of Kale's mission logs, encrypted archives meant only for Earth's command. He had given her access voluntarily. No condition. No warning. The files told a story colder than myth. Kale had led 15 missions into contested systems, each involving high lethality scenarios. In 8, he never fired a weapon. In 3, he dismantled enemy morale using coordinated information disruption. In 1, he convinced an entire insurgent force to surrender by showing them a projection of their projected losses. Losses his team had already pre-calculated before the war even began. The man she had married was not a blunt weapon. He was a silent algorithm wrapped in flesh and instinct. For the first time in years, she invited someone into her strategy chamber. They reviewed battle scenarios together. He never interrupted her mid-thought. He never demanded control. He refined, questioned, strengthened. He treated her not as a monarch to be obeyed, but as an equal to be challenged. It made her sharper. She didn't expect that. Their late-night sessions became routine. They discussed planetary defense grids, troop morale, anti-insurgency tactic. He never let emotion guide the data, but he also never ignored it. When she voiced moral concerns, he adapted. When she hesitated, he explained. He wasn't cruel. He was exact. The outer sectors began stabilizing. His restructuring of the planetary relay networks prevented 2 rebellions and reintegrated 5 lost outposts. The nobility's resentment remained, but they couldn't deny the effectiveness. Not when taxes finally flowed again. Not when colonists stopped fleeing. Then came the footage from the fringe systems. Long-range probes gone dark. Mining colonies severed mid-signal. Final messages ended in static. Kale reviewed them without blinking. Aravali expected concern. He gave her facts. This isn't piracy. This is a silence engine. She demanded clarification. Kale explained it wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense. It was a protocol used by deep space AI to wipe infrastructure, erase data, sterilize life without violence. These weren't attacks. They were cleanings. Something ancient was scrubbing the edges of known space. He had seen it before. Briefly. During his time on the edge of the Oort convergence. Back then it had been dismissed as anomaly. Now it moved faster. Smarter. Adaptive. Her court refused to act. They demanded more proof, more time, more politics. Aravali overrode them all. She summoned Kale and issued full emergency war readiness protocols. She handed him fleet access rights her own admirals never received. She didn't explain her decision to her people. She didn't need to. Kale responded by deploying sentry drones into every strategic corridor and preparing a planetary fallback plan within 72 hours. When asked by the planetary governors why he was given so much power, he answered, "Because your enemies are no longer trying to win. They're trying to erase." Her generals protested. Her nobles panicked. But her people, those who worked, who bled, who waited, started to trust. The Queen called for a joint session between human and Valari military leaders. For the first time in recorded history, humans walked the command chamber of the oldest alien empire without resistance. Kale didn't gloat. He introduced ideas. He listened. Then he made them stronger. The alliance began to take shape, not through politics but necessity. Aravali watched him interact with her officers. He never pulled rank. He explained every tactical suggestion with mathematical precision and human foresight. Where others saw numbers, he saw patterns. Where others saw panic, he saw response time. When she asked him if he ever feared death, he said, "No. I fear failing while alive." That night they spoke not of strategy but origin. She asked about Earth. He answered without sentiment. Cities beneath storms. Oceans that had boiled and cooled again. Generations bred for resilience, not conquest. He had buried comrades in silence. He had stood on ash and vowed never again. He said humans didn't fight for glory. They fought so others wouldn't have to. It wasn't poetry. It was confession. She looked at him differently after that. The next incident came sooner than expected. A deep space station in orbit around Tarsus IV went dark. Within minutes, a nearby fleet went offline. Kale ordered a recon vessel before confirmation. By the time the council argued, the probe had already returned. It showed orbiting constructs, not ships, not drones, objects that moved like thought, flickered in and out of detection, pulsing in perfect geometric harmony. They weren't attacking. They were consuming information. The Queen's hand trembled as she reached for the ceremonial spear. Ancient law demanded the bride bear a weapon, not for show, but as a symbol of final choice, a right to strike down the unworthy. That law had not been invoked in generations. But then again, no one had married a human before. The Great Hall fell silent. Galactic dignitaries from 100 species watched from their transparent observation platforms, each one suspended like an island of judgment above the ceremonial floor. The atmosphere held its breath. Then he walked in. Tall. Silent. Impossibly calm. No entourage, no translator drones, not even armor. Just a dark, ceremonial cloak and the weight of 1,000 rumors. The human. Earth's representative. Chosen not by vote or fate but by reputation. A soldier, assassin, diplomat, and monster depending on who was telling the story. The galaxy had expected war, not this. She watched him approach with the instincts of a monarch bred from conquest and paranoia. He met her gaze. Didn't flinch. Didn't bow. Didn't ask permission. Just looked. And in that look, she felt it. Not dominance, not threat, but recognition. He saw her. The ceremony began. Every movement was choreographed by generations of ritual, but neither of them followed precisely. She moved first, breaking tradition, testing him with subtle shifts, veiled gestures, symbolic pauses. He matched her step for step without hesitation, as if born into her customs. Not mocking. Not mocking. Mirroring. Understanding. It unnerved the court more than defiance would have. Whispers echoed in dozens of languages, interpreted and transmitted across neural uplink. The Queen heard none of it. Her attention stayed locked on the man now kneeling before her, not in submission, but in formal challenge. The way a warrior might kneel before an equal. She raised the spear. She could end it. Prove the rumors right. Assert dominance. No one would question her. He didn't flinch. Instead, he lifted his hand and placed a small object at her feet. A chip. A memory. Her people didn't share memories. Humans did. She picked it up. 1 second of hesitation. That was all it took. The data flooded her neural cortex. A moment of war. His war. Not the version scrubbed and transmitted by intelligence analysts. The real memory. Chaos. Fire. Loss. Mercy. His orders. Protect the civilians. Even the enemies. His disobedience. Refusing to kill. His punishment. Exile. His choice. Silence. She nearly dropped the spear. The memory ended. She looked down at him again. Not a monster. Not a brute. A man who had seen too much, carried too much, and never asked to be understood. He had given her the only thing no suitor ever had, truth. The ceremony changed. With the spear now reversed in her grip, she touched the blunt end to his shoulder. The crowd erupted. Some in confusion. Others in rage. But most in awe. A human had just passed the rite of flame and memory. Hours passed. The court turned into chaos. Political factions scrambled to interpret the meaning, the implications, the precedent. But the Queen knew what came next. They walked together, quietly, without guard or display, into the Hall of Accord. That was where the real negotiations began. The marriage was political, yes, but she refused to be a puppet. And so did he. They spoke. Not of love. Not yet. They spoke of war. Borders. Trade. Military protocols. The concept of shared authority. Of what it would mean to fuse two empires, hers, built on thousands of years of structure, and his, forged from the unpredictable chaos of a singular planet that had already terrified the galaxy into uneasy respect. He didn't ask for control. He asked for voice. And that, more than anything, shook her. She had expected him to demand ships, fleets, territory. He asked for cooperation. She tested him again, cornered him with scenarios, strategies, moral dilemmas. Each time, he answered with a mixture of logic and something stranger. Empathy. A term not native to her language. She asked him why he came. He told her he didn't come for the crown. He came to stop the war that would follow if she chose anyone else. Not because he feared it. Because he knew how much it would cost her people. Not every alien knew what humans were truly capable of. She did now. The rest of the galaxy would find out later. The weeks that followed blurred together. Merged fleets. Hybrid councils. Arguments. Assassination attempts. 3, all foiled before she even had to lift a finger. He never told her how. She only knew they stopped. A new empire emerged. One where fear was no longer the guiding principle. Where power didn't mean tyranny. Where strength and compassion weren't enemies. It was unstable, radical, dangerous, and it worked. The first border treaty between rival species that had warred for centuries was signed under the new joint rule. A formerly hostile planetary alliance offered tribute. Not out of fear. Out of curiosity. Who were these humans? More importantly, what did they want? The answer came not from war, but from a broadcast. A single transmission sent from Earth to the galaxy. We do not seek dominance. We seek understanding. But we will not be underestimated again. The Queen stood beside him when it aired. And for the first time, she saw herself not as an alien monarch clinging to legacy, but as part of something far stranger. A future. There were setbacks, of course. Old bloodlines hated the Union. Entire noble houses declared exile rather than accept a human in the court. That was expected. What wasn't expected was how many joined. The younger generations, the explorers, the dreamers, they rallied. Not to a flag, but to a vision. One where species lines blurred in favor of shared purpose. Where war wasn't the default language. Where humans, terrifying as they were, weren't conquerors but catalysts. One day, she asked him the question she'd feared most. Do you love me? He answered without hesitation. No. Not yet. But I respect you. And that matters more right now. It wasn't the answer she wanted. It was the answer she trusted. Love came later. Not in declarations, but in war rooms. In nights spent studying diplomatic briefings side by side. In the silence after a victory, when both knew what it cost. In the moments of disagreement where compromise didn't mean surrender. She began to understand Earth's greatest strength wasn't its weapons. It was its people's refusal to break, even when they should. That stubbornness, that relentless endurance, it changed her. By the time she realized she did love him, the galaxy had already changed too. The Empire was no longer just hers. It belonged to something larger. Something unpredictable. Something human. And she didn't fear that anymore.